Hello everyone, I am Dr. Siddharth Sinha and today I am going to be talking about cerebral palsy. By the end of this lecture, the student should be able to define cerebral palsy, describe the etiology and causes of cerebral palsy, describe the various classification used for CP, describe typical examination findings in patients with the disease, and describe the treatment options available for patients with cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy by definition is a non-progressive neuromuscular disorder of cerebral origin. It is a heterogeneous disorder of movement and posture that has a wide variety of presentations, ranging from mild motor disturbance to severe total body involvement. Cerebral palsy has three distinctive features which are common to all patients. First is motor involvement. The second is an insult to the developing brain, which is often from the time of conception to 2 years of age. And the third is a non-progressive neurological deficit. A varying degree of upper motor neuron signs like spasticity, ataxia and athetosis may also be seen. The insult to the brain affects motor control and gait in these children. We have to do regular assessments for these children as the orthopedic management plan often changes as the child grows. There are changes in the gait as well as the deformities which require regular assessment. The causes of cerebral palsy include prenatal, perinatal, and postnatal. Prenatal causes are due to defective development of the brain following infections, fetal exposure to drugs or alcohol, or RH incompatibility. Perinatal causes like stress or anoxia to the fetus following placental abruption or during delivery can also cause cerebral palsy. Postnatal causes like meningitis, encephalitis, or other infections affecting the brain, or any episode of hypoxia, such as a cardiopulmonary arrest, near drowning, suffocation, or trauma, can lead to the development of cerebral palsy. A hypoxic injury to the brain is often responsible for cerebral palsy. This is evidenced by a periventricular leukomalacia on MRI of the brain. This means that the areas of necrosis will be found around the areas of the ventricles, signifying a hypoxic injury. Cerebral palsy can be classified into geographical, physiologic, and now the latest is the Gross Motor Functional Classification System or the GMFCS. Now, the regional classification usually involves the use of the number of limbs. So, a monoplegia is usually a single extremity is involved. A paraplegia is that both lower extremities are involved. A hemiplegia is only half of the body is involved. Other types are diplegia, quadriplegia, double hemiplegia, and total body. This is now less used. Physiologic classification was also used previously but now has been replaced by the Gross Motor Functional Classification System or the GMFCS. The GMFCS classification system classifies the functional ability of the children. So, for example, grade 1, the child with cerebral palsy has nearly normal gross motor function. In type 2, the child can walk independently but has limitations in running and jumping. Type 3, the child walks with assistive devices. Associated conditions with cerebral palsy include the presence of learning disabilities and mental impairment. A lot of children have seizures. Many have movement disorders, visual and auditory impairment, hydrocephalus, and there might be malnutrition due to gastroesophageal reflux. Characteristic findings on examination include muscle weakness with variable distribution. Many joints are deformed due to muscle imbalances. There might be joint stiffness. The presence of upper motor neuron signs like exaggerated reflexes, clonus, and athetoid movements will also be present. And there also may be problems in speech and hearing. The deformities in the upper limb include an adduction and internal rotation deformity of the shoulder, along with a flexion deformity at the elbow, with the forearm being pronated as you can see here. In the wrist and hand, the fingers and the wrist are in flexion and there might be often a thumb in palm sign. Deformities of the lower limb include a scissoring gait as you can see here. It is called scissoring gait because the legs tend to fall in front of each other like a scissor. In the hip, there might be a flexion, adduction, deformity of the hip, and there also might be a subluxation or dislocation of the hip. Flexion deformities are often seen in the knee as well. We might see an equinus, equinovarus, or equinovalgus deformity in the foot or ankle. In the spine and pelvis, scoliosis and pelvic obliquity is often seen. The diagnosis is a clinical diagnosis because there is no definitive investigation which can confirm the diagnosis. A detailed history of pre, peri, or postnatal events is very important, as well as a very detailed clinical examination to assess the impairment on function. And gait assessment, a detailed neurological evaluation at each visit, as well as a function in each visit, is required. For radiological tests, we can go for a CT, MRI, or PET scan, which may indicate some underlying pathology. These children are often treated best using an individualized approach and a multidisciplinary team. The team often involves an orthopedic surgeon, a pediatrics, a physical therapist, as well as a speech therapist in cases where they are required. The aim is to develop skills as per the patient's abilities. The orthopedic treatment involves the prevention and correction of deformities as well as the control of spasticity. Other occupational therapy like speech and rehabilitation is also important. There are 4 treatment principles for the management of cerebral palsy. The first is that the nervous system injury by definition is non-progressive. However, the deformities caused by abnormal muscle forces and contractures are progressive. Second, treatments currently available correct the secondary deformities only and not the primary problem, which is the brain injury. Third, the deformities typically become worse during times of rapid growth, and it is often beneficial to delay surgery until a significant growth spurt is over to decrease the chance of recurrence. Fourth, any treatment should be done to minimize the negative effect it has on the patient's socialization and education. For non-operative management, the first aim is to control spasticity. This can be done by using medications like diazepam, baculonym toxin, phenol injections, and a dorsal rhizotomy nerve block to control the spasticity of selective muscles. We can use splints and brace as well as physical therapy to improve the deformities and prevent them from worsening. We can use ankle foot orthosis and spinal braces for the same. Operative treatments are often done when the spastic deformity is not controlled by conservative measures. A fixed deformity which interferes with function also requires an operation, and secondary complications like bony deformities and dislocations will often need operative treatment. The operative treatments can be divided into soft tissue procedures and bony procedures. Soft tissue procedures include tenotomy, such that of a tendo-Achilles for an equinus contracture, and a tenotomy of the hip adductors for an adduction contracture at the hip. Muscle or tendon lengthening procedures can also be done, such as for the tendo-Achilles as well as the gastrocnemius. Tendon transfers are often done to prevent and correct foot deformities. Bony procedures like osteotomies and arthrodesis may also be done to maintain a corrected deformity. An osteotomy is a surgically induced fracture, and an arthrodesis is a surgically induced fusion of the joints. This is a table showing the common deformities and their treatment seen in cerebral palsy. In the foot, commonly an equinus or an equinovarus deformity is seen, in which a lengthening of the tendo-Achilles can be done, or a tibial transfer of the tibialis anterior to the cuboid. In the knee, a flexion deformity is very common, which can be treated by either long calipers or a hamstring release. In the hip, adduction deformities can be treated with either an obturator neurectomy or an adductor muscle release, also called as an adductor muscle tenotomy. In the shoulder, adduction deformities can be seen, which are treated by a subscapularis release. In the elbow, flexion deformities can be treated using the release of the elbow flexors. In the wrist, the flexion deformities can be treated using either a wrist splint or a release of the flexors. They can also be treated with fusion or carpectomy if the deformity is very severe. In the fingers, deformities can be treated using lengthening or release of the flexor tendons. So based on this, what you can see is we can either try to release the soft tissues using a tenotomy, or we try to fuse the joint to improve function. The main aim of surgery at the end of the day is to always improve the function for the patient. So such children often have a poor prognosis because of an organic lesion in the brain, and main aim is to improve the quality of life. That often depends on the functional status as well as the rehabilitation of the child. The main difference between polio and cerebral palsy is that polio is infective. It may manifest at any age following the infection. There are no predisposing factors. It is a purely motor paralysis which is flaccid without any UMN signs. The paralysis may be patchy or irregular in pattern, and there is absolutely no movement possible in the affected limb. Whereas in cerebral palsy, the cerebral palsy has a multiple factorial pathogenesis. It is usually seen in children, and there are many predisposing factors like cerebral anoxia, premature birth, etc. The paralysis may be spastic or flaccid with upper motor neuron signs. Regular patterns of paralysis can be seen, and uncontrolled movements may be possible in the affected limb. These are my references. World Cerebral Palsy Day is on October 6th. I hope you liked this video. Please like, share and subscribe if you like the content. Thank you so much.